Okay, been a while. So we have a new thing to worry about and fret about. That, of course, are the fires in Southern California. And our study is dedicated today to thinking about how we get smarter about life and what we do about these natural disasters and what kind of part human beings play in that. Where might wisdom help us out? We're still in the background of the war, which so much has changed since we last met, vis-a-vis what's happening in Israel and what people feel is their right to continue to do violence. So we dedicate our study to that as well, to common sense and respect for humanity and all of humanity amongst our friends and family and brothers and sisters in Israel, as well as amongst all people. Okay, we're at the end of chapter 6. I'll remind folks that we didn't do one chapter in one meeting because it's a long chapter, and the middle section we did last week was connected to one of my favorite rabbinic passages in Midrash Tanhuma, and that was itself its own literary unit. Today it's a different literary unit. Really, 20 to 35 are a unit that more than anything else talks about the dangers of adultery, or adulteress, I should say. The blame, of course, you'll see is placed as usual on the woman. The commandment or the advice or the wisdom to stay away is aimed towards the man. Typical, but of course we could take it both ways. And we have at least one famous passage here that we'll take a look at, and another passage that is reminiscent of something we're very familiar with. So, Les, could I ask you to read 20 to 26?
Where is it?
Oh, do you not have the text?
Oh, okay, here we go. No, study sheet. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. My son, keep your father's commandment. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. Tie them over your heart always. Bind them around your throat. When you walk, it will lead you. When you lie down, it will watch over you. And when you are awake, it will talk to you. For the commandment is a lamp, the teaching is a light, and the way to life is the rebuke that disciplines. It will keep you from an evil woman, from the smooth tongue of a forbidden woman. Do not lust for her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. The last loaf of bread will go for a prostitute. A married woman will snare a person of honor.
Okay. So let's see. Elohana says she's been trying to get in. Madalena, could you see if you could help Ella?
Yes, I haven't seen her join.
She just wrote me a text message.
Yes, I'll contact her.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so initial impressions. I don't know, unless you get first crack at it. What are you thinking?
Well, it starts out sort of the same about your father and your mother, and then it sort of, there's actions, tied around your heart, around your throat. Walk with it, lie down with it, be awake with it, talk with it, and then it compares it to a light, and then it warns you against evil women.
So one might say that the advice in the beginning really comes to serve the warning at the end. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could isolate the first part of it, the first half of it, and say, well, that's just a great thing. We'll talk a minute about that. But it seems the way that the first of all, the Masoretic text, you'll see there's a pei at the end of this paragraph. That means it's a parsha ptucha. It's at the end of the tradition, of the scribal tradition. That means at the end of that sentence, an empty space is left to until the next line, which is a way, an ancient, doesn't necessarily mean that was the way it was written, but for at least 1200 years or more, we know that that's been at least the breakdown of the literary unit. What I mean, anything sound familiar here from other places? Well, you said, Les, you said, the son and the father and the mother. That repeats itself quite a bit. And in fact, it's very, very similar to what we found in the first chapter, which is Shema b'ni Musa. I think Shema b'ni Musa avicha ve'al titosh Torat imecha. Listen or obey, son, your father's Shema b'ni ethics.
Sounds like Deuteronomy.
Well,
Especially the Shema parts.
Right, and we're going to get to that in a second. Interestingly enough, there's nothing, Fox, which is a pretty good and a very Jewish-oriented commentary, doesn't refer to Deuteronomy a second. So Rabbi Malka, as long as you brought it up, and please bear in mind, everybody, thanks for voting. I can only see 6 of you, so I don't know who wants to speak. So just kind of butt in or just speak up. So I as Malka was reminded here of, at least in the content of this passage, we all know. If you want to go ahead and read that for us, Malka.
The next paragraph.
Yeah, Deuteronomy 6.
Take Deuteronomy 6:6-9. Take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day, and press them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Right, that's part of the Ahavta. I think almost everybody here probably recognizes that. When it talks in Deuteronomy of doing these things, is it to be taken literally or metaphorically? Would you say?
Metaphorically.
I think literally.
It's a metaphor, but it's been actuated as literal by our tradition by putting on tefillin.
Right, so that's an interesting question, right? I had no answer. What chicken and egg kind of a thing? Was it first a practice that was put down in writing here? Or I see Troy, thanks for that. I do see comments that pop up at the bottom of the screen, so that's good. Troy says both. I think that's probably a good answer. But chicken and egg, hard to know. Was it a practice that was documented or regulated in this passage afterwards, or was it metaphor that became practice, or did from the beginning? I think most of us who grew up with this tradition and do it on a regular basis think of it as, well, that's what we do. It's an educational mitzvah, but you can touch it. There's a concrete aspect of it. In other words, it's not enough to say remember. You've got to have tzitzit to help you remember. Not enough to say teach it to your children, or think about it when you're in your house or when you go out of the house. No, you have to have a mezuzah there. Or when it's not enough just to think about it wherever think about it in your mind, between your eyes. Think about it in your heart, next to your heart. So that's the wording. Interestingly enough, while the idea is reflected in Proverbs 6, the wording is quite different. I mean, the wording, I'm just going to go over it. You have the word in the third, those can read Hebrew, in the third line, kashram, so ukshartem. So that root is there. Ukshartem al yadecha vayu totavot beinenecha. There's nothing here beinenecha, but there is al gargarotecha, and wear it as a piece of jewelry on your throat, on your neck. Here you have, as you walk, a reflexive verb, bitat lechacha. As you walk yourself, let it guide you. So the verb walk, the verb to lie is there. So there is some verbal connections, but I want to say that this is what I think happened here. I think the idea is well known to the author of Proverbs. The idea of mezuzah and tefillin. But he's using it. He wants to use it metaphorically, right? So I think all commentators would agree that the passage in Proverbs is just metaphorically. Doesn't mean that you should put. Somebody probably thought bind them around your throat would be like an amulet, And there are amulets that have these texts. The whole idea of putting a mezuzah around a neck, those of us that grew up with people, that's an amulet. That comes from the world of amulets. So does the Star of David, by the way, and a chai. But in particular, having a mezuzah around your neck, which is not in part of our tradition, and as far as I know, it's a new thing. Whether it was 19th or 20th century, certainly 20th century, it does have its basis as far as an amulet is concerned. But in Proverbs, it's metaphorical. Yes, go ahead, whoever was talking.
Could you talk about the timing? I mean, when did the practice of using tefillin and wearing a tallis, when was that introduced chronologically? And how does that relate to when Proverbs and Deuteronomy was probably written?
Yeah, so a good question. I mean, I think Proverbs, this section of Proverbs is considered to be late, meaning that it's certainly, I don't know, I don't know if it's late First Temple, early Second Temple, or late. The editing of the book of Proverbs is late. That's towards the end of or mid Second Temple period. So that's, let's say, the middle of the first millennium, or towards the end of the first millennium, before the Common Era. The Torah, the text from Deuteronomy, is assumed to be probably from the 8th century, so hundreds of years beforehand. Now, your question about when do we know what people did, that's a much more difficult question, right? You have to have archaeological evidence for that, or a combination of outside sources from the time. If we had some sort of Assyrian source or Phoenician source that talked about how the Israelites put these boxes on their heads, sorry, somebody's making some noise. Madeline, if you could check and mute whoever the noise is coming from. Unless, of course, it's coming from me.
Sure, I'll check.
They found ancient tefillin at Qumran.
Yes, I was just about to get to that. But do you know when that's from?
What, the 2nd century?
Yeah, I don't know if it's as old as 2nd century BCE. A lot of things. Do you know for sure it is? But it's
no, I could look it up though. But
yeah,
Qumran wasn't in existence, right? In the Common Era.
Yeah, there's things from the 1st century there. I think there's also things that are called Dead Sea Scrolls, are sometimes from other places, and like we certainly have texts that are from the 1st century CE. But I don't know why I think I remember the tefillin being a little bit later. But let's say even they're from the 2nd century, right? So that's the earliest we have evidence, less, and that's after the composition of Proverbs. By how much we don't know, and do they know of each other? So the truth of the matter is, I don't think we could draw a line, a linear development here. What I'm taking away from this first part of the section is that there was this concept of doing something practically, concretely, and it was metaphorized. There's such a word in this section, and it's about and here it's about teaching wisdom in general, and not just Shema Yisrael in that particular paragraph, or those 4 paragraphs, the 2 in Deuteronomy and the 2 in Exodus that talk about tefillin, which are in the tefillin themselves. In tefillin, there are 4 passages: the 2 that we know that come one after the other in our prayer book in Deuteronomy, and 2 which are lesser known, part of the Passover story. Tzitzit comes from a different section, from Numbers. And I don't think that we would have any archaeological evidence. Maybe there is strands, but the thought is that it wasn't necessarily a talit that we put on for prayer. It was a piece of clothing that all men, or at least noblemen, would wear. One last connection is that the tying it upon the heart is very similar to the law in Exodus. I didn't write down where. I think it's in chapter 28. That talks about Aaron putting the choshen, the breastplate and that special choshen thing, on his heart, and putting words on your heart. And that's something that was described as being tangible. And I think it's made into a metaphor here as well. Mal, could you come up with anything?
I didn't. I was listening to you, so I didn't.
Okay, no need. You know, if you'd like to, just butt in. Okay. All right. So that's the first. Any other comments about that first section before we get to the light? Okay, how about this kiner mitzvah v'torah or? For the commandment, mitzvah, right? The commandment is a lamp, and the teaching is light. Ner, by the way, we always think of ner as candles, Ner means light, probably think more of those little earthenware things, those little mini things like Aladdin kind of things that you rub, right? That's a Ner. But still, it means a source of light. Is this verse familiar to anybody? It comes up a lot. It comes up a lot in formula that are part of title pages of books, Kiner Mitzvah Torah, or yeah, I don't know why I know, but I've known this since I was a kid. So I'm wondering where I didn't take the time to look up where the multiple places it is. I did find something in rabbinic literature that we'll look at in just a second. Well, why don't we look at it now? Dan, would you read for us Babylonian Talmud Megillah 16b?
The verse states, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. From Esther. Rav Yehuda said, light. This is referring to the Torah that they once again studied. And similarly, it says, for the mitzvah is a lamp and Torah is light, what we just read. Gladness, simcha. This is referring to the festivals that they once again observed. And similarly, it says, and you should be glad, v'samachta, on your festival, according to Deuteronomy. Joy, sason. This is referring to circumcision, as they once again circumcised their sons. And similarly, it says, I rejoice, sas, at your word in Psalms, which the sages understood as referring to David's rejoicing over the mitzvah of circumcision.
Okay, so I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of David rejoicing in the mitzvah of circumcision coming out of Psalm 119, by the way, is that one psalm that goes on forever and ever. There's over 100 verses. It's the psalm that it's arranged alphabetically. Each paragraph is 4 lines, and each word of each first word of the paragraph starts with the letter Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. And that, by the way, is the psalm that is used liturgically, certainly in the Mizrahi Sephardic world, but also amongst Ashkenazim in Orthodoxy. I don't think I've really seen it done by liberal Jews outside of Israel. It's for Otiot Neshama, what are called when you're at a memorial service, not at a funeral, but at a memorial service afterwards, or just when somebody goes to the grave on their own. Then they will chant the paragraphs of Psalm 119 according to the letters of that person's name. And if somebody has a name like, what would be a name that has multiple letters, like, let's say, just say Yitzchak ben Yosef, Yosef ben Yitzchak. So you have 3 yuds there. So during this reciting of the name, then you're saying that same paragraph, the same 4 lines of yud 4 times, 3 times, 4 times. And those that are egalitarian that want to be frum as well, they add the mother's name. So you almost never get out of there. It goes on forever. That's Psalm 119. But that particular verse, I rejoice at your word, using the word sas, it was understood in the Midrash as David, who's considered to be the author, rejoicing over performing the mitzvah of circumcision on his son. Now, so what we understand from this section from the Talmud is that there were things that were missing during the oppression, during Esther and Mordechai's time. One of them was they weren't allowed to study the Torah. At least that's what he's projecting onto that time. How do we know that they were happy? This verse says the Jews had light, gladness, joy, and honor. Why are there so many different words there? Well, light because of the Torah, and we know that from the verse that we read above. Gladness because of the festivals, all festivals, Simcha, and Sason. And what the Talmud doesn't add here is Vayikar, without the honor thing. So just to show you that Torah Or, right? Torah Ora, Torah Ora, Hallelujah. For those who remember that from old style prayers. Okay. Anything else on the light issue? I was reminded of the first chapter of John, but I wanted to keep this to one sheet, so I didn't bring that. But I think there would be some interesting parallels there as well, as Jesus being the light. Anything else? Okay, that brings us to the last penultimate line, the last verse, that says the last loaf of bread will go for a prostitute. It took me a while to figure that out, but of course, the meaning, the simple meaning of the contextual meaning is that you'll spend your last penny, right? Your last dollar, your last penny on the prostitute. That's what it's like a gambling addiction, a sex addiction is kind of. And of course, as I said before, the rebuke is aimed towards the man, but the woman is evil in herself, right? An evil woman. She has a smooth tongue. She's a forbidden woman. Don't lust for her beauty. On one hand, you could say, well, that's aimed towards the young man, not lusting, but of course it's her beauty. And then it says, let her captivate you with her eyes. Now, does that mean you'll be captivated by her eyes passively? Or I would say probably she's captivating you on purpose with her eyes. And you should know that you'll spend your last penny, your last shekel on her. And there's a parallel between prostitute on the one hand, the Isha Zonah, and the other hand, an Eshet Ish, a married woman. Probably the ancient meaning of Isha Zonah is not prostitute, but I don't know if it's probably, but I know that this is part of the history of the etymology of the word. Liznot means to stray, to betray. And a prostitute, of course, is not a betrayal. It's an adulterous woman who's a betrayal. So there's a lot of connection semantically between prostitute Zonah and married woman Eshet Ish in the history of language. Any comments before we look at?
I thought it was interesting that I assumed that the women that they were talking about were single women, but that last line, a married woman, was near you. So you even have to be careful of married women.
Yeah, so that's an interesting. It is an interesting thing. In other words, if we want to err on the side of misogynism, we would say any woman, right? A single woman as well. But there is no. It's not forbidden to sleep with a single woman. There are certain procedures that need to happen after that, right? Or before that, perhaps. But it's not. That's not the same as sleeping with a married woman, right? Yeah. Okay. I shall leave a message. This must be about the electrician. How do I get back to the regular screen? There we go. Okay. So Dan, would you read from at the bottom of the page from Sota? Masechet Sota is about a woman who's suspected of adultery. So we're not surprised to find this tradition there. Sota and Zonah, they're related, as I say, etymologically, but Sota literally means a woman who has strayed from the way. Go ahead.
Rav Avira interpreted the verse homiletically. There were times he said this interpretation in the name of Rabbi Ami, and there were times he said in the name of Rabbi Asi. Concerning anyone who eats bread without washing his hands, it is as if he engaged in sexual intercourse with a prostitute, as it is stated. For an account of a harlot, a man is brought to a loaf of bread.
Talk about wanting to prove a point from something which is totally random or not really related to, other than the word bread appears in both, right? So you may know that there's an obligation to wash one's hands. I don't know, Troy, I don't know if you're familiar with this Jewish custom of a ritual washing of hands before eating of bread. Not all foods, but before eating bread. And sitting down in a traditional Jewish meal, bread is the key blessing. A blessing is made over the bread, and that includes an entire meal. But if you sit down to a bowl of fruit, a bowl of vegetables, and a bowl of oatmeal, you say different blessings on each of those things, as opposed to if you had just had the piece of toast beforehand for your breakfast and said so eating bread is is connected to symbolically the altar and eating in a sacred fashion. Therefore, it's a ritual washing of hands is demanded. It's not about the dirt on your hands. It's about a symbolic purification of the whole body by just doing the hands. And that was a big deal amongst the rabbis. In other words, that was one of the things, that was one of their campaigns that they're constantly talking about, as was tithing, a sabbatical year. But this is one of those things, and I would imagine even more prevalent because it's all the time, every year. So not really connected to our verse, taking the text out of context in good midrashic. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'll tell you in a second, but I've got to. Let me see if I can do this by message.
My phone?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, folks. We're dealing with a challenge at my mother's house, which is why we set out on the way. I've got to confirm an electrician. I'll be right back. Okay. All right.
Sure, that would be great. That would be great.
So let's go on to the next section if we can. Megan, would you like to read from verse 27?
Can anyone break embers into their bosom without burning their clothes? Can anyone walk on live coals without scorching their feet? It is the same with the man who sleeps with his fellow's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. A thief is not held in contempt for stealing to appease his hunger. Yet if caught, he must pay sevenfold. He must give up all he owns. He who commits adultery is devoid of sense. Only one who would destroy himself does such a thing. He will meet with disease and disgrace. His reproach will never be expunged. The fury of the husband will be passionate. He will show no pity on his day of vengeance. He will not have regard for any ransom. He will refuse your bribe, however great.
Hey. So this is when you want to kind of say to the author of Proverbs, tell us what you really think. So any comments or reactions, Megan or others? Once again, just speak up because I can't see everybody. Rita Claire, something tells me you've got something to share with us.
I did originally when we first started out, when it talks about the married woman, and it makes it sound like it's the woman who's enticing the man, And honestly, I think it's the man who is looking after the woman. So here, it's yeah, if the woman is consenting, she's just as guilty. I don't know what else to say about this.
Okay, so a good point. In the Jewish tradition, a woman cannot consent if she's married to one man to have sex with another man.
Mhm.
That's paramount to. There's no. In other words, if it's a single woman, that has its own laws as well. What happens is that part of marriage or not? What's the intention? But what does happen in this paragraph, I think, is that it's no longer blaming. There doesn't seem to be blaming of the woman in this one. Would you
Mhm.
folks?
Yes.
Right. This is really zeroing in on the man and it's kind of like, are you crazy? Like, have you lost your senses? You would walk on coals, right?
Mhm.
Scorching, any other comments or impressions?
It reminds me of one of the scriptures that says, "Rejoice with the wife of your youth."
Right, but that's when you're married to the same person for decades, right? Yeah.
Well, I don't think it has to be decades. I just think that a man should stop and consider that at any time.
Okay. Just to point out 32, when it says he who commits adultery is devoid of sense, the Hebrew is no efisha, the person a man who commits adultery with a woman. Chathar lev, has no heart, literally no heart, sense and heart. And we use that, for instance, modern Hebrew, lasim lev is to pay attention, to put your heart into it. Not always how we use heart. We use the word attention. So Dan, why don't you read for us from the Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, which is a early midrash, a Tannaitic midrash, first few centuries of the Common Era, of the book of Exodus.
But if one steals away from his friend, who asks to be paid for teaching him, and goes and hides behind a fence to learn Torah, that is, to overhear the lesson that he's teaching, though he's called a thief, he acquires merit for himself. Of him it is written in Mishlei, they will not shame a thief for stealing to fill his soul that is hungry for Torah. In the end, he will be appointed as a teacher over the congregation, and he will return the theft in full. As it is written, in the end he will repay sevenfold, all the wealth of his house will he give. Sevenfold signifying Torah, namely in Psalms. The words of the Lord are pure words, silver purged in an earthen crucible, refined sevenfold.
Okay, and you're all asking yourself, what does this possibly have to do with the section that we read? Other than the fact that one verse, 30, is quoted. So when I saw this, I was reminded of what I and many rabbis do when it comes to preparing a sermon or a study sheet or whatever it is on one of those particularly difficult Shabbatot where the Torah and the Haftarah just don't feel very relevant or feel problematic. We often take one single verse and take it totally out of context. And I think all of you have seen me do that many times over the years, right? And essentially that's kind of what we're doing right now. But I think what I saw was you have a paragraph in front of you. You're sitting, I imagine the sages to be learning this together, having a conversation, discussion, pure fantasy. I have no historical basis for this. Well, almost none. And they're going over and it's kind of saying, well, what can is there anything we could talk about here that is not about adultery? We've been talking about adultery too much with the young men. They're not listening to us anymore. And something is plucked out of it. And it's something which is secondary to the message here, other than the way it is in the message here we didn't talk about before, and is that a thief is not held in contempt in verse 30 for stealing to appease his hunger, yet if he caught, he must be paid sevenfold. In other words, you can't, on one hand, we understand a thief who's hungry. On the other hand, he's still got to pay for it, and it's kind of a kal v'chomer, all the more so somebody who's committing adultery with another man's wife, all the more so. But of course, that's taken out of context here, and we hear about teaching Torah or studying Torah without being paid. So there seems to be an issue here of payment to the teachers. That's an interesting thing to use this source for when talking about a community and what people are gaining from their rabbi, from their teacher. Any situation. I just happen to mention rabbi congregation because that's our situation. Another way is also how do you pay back? How can you possibly pay back your teachers or the institution? I know that one of the ways that I always tried to pay back my professors over the years when I would meet them in Jerusalem is kind of a small place, and often in the years after I graduated, after I was a rabbi in a community, even after I came to Tel Aviv, if I would run into one of my professors who I hadn't seen, including just 2 years ago or a year and a half ago in Denver at the biblical convention I went to, where I ran into Professor Emmanuel Tov, I always tell them that I use, and it's truthful, I use, if not every day, every week, literally every week, I use the tools that they gave me, that they provided me. And that's my way of kind of paying them back for the wisdom they imparted. But when I saw this early tradition in Rabbi Ishmael, I was reminded of a story which is not relevant to Proverbs here, but it's one of those stories that is kind of a classic in Jewish literacy. This is a story you should know about Hillel the elder. And I hope you'll see why I was reminded of that here in my stream of consciousness. If you could do one more for us from Masechet Yoma, Dan. This is a tractate that deals with the laws of Yom Kippur, but of course many other things as well. Go ahead.
It is reported about Hillel the elder that every day he used to work and earn one tropaik, half a dinar, half of which he would give to the watchman of the house to study, the other half he used on food for himself and the members of his household. One day he was unable to earn anything, so the watchman at the house of study did not let him in. He then climbed to the roof and hung on, sitting over the opening of the skylight so that he could hear the words of the living God from the mouths of Shemaiah and Avtalyon. It was said that there was a Sabbath eve in the winter solstice, and snow came down on him from heaven. When the dawn rose, Shemaiah said to Avtalyon, "Brother Avtalyon, every day this house is bright with light, but today it is dark and the day cloudy." When they looked up, they saw the figure of a man in the skylight. They climbed to the roof and found Hillel covered with 3 cubits of snow. They removed the snow from him, bathed and anointed him, and as they seated him in front of an open fire, they said, "This man deserves to have the Sabbath profaned on his behalf."
Which is the ultimate, right? The ultimate kind of privilege, I guess. This is a classic story. Little children, certainly in Orthodox institutions growing up, how much Hillel, the great Hillel, came from poverty and overcame poverty and his devotion, and etc. And on the other hand, it also brings up this rather ugly aspect of the fact that somebody didn't have enough money and they wouldn't let him study Torah, which is, it's relevant in our time, whether it's Jewish day school, which is very expensive, whether it's university for everybody, all wisdom. That's the idea, I think, of public schools, that this never happens, or community colleges, that financial reasons finances are not a reason to keep them. This is not just somebody who's not able to work, studying and therefore not able to work and provide their family. This is people that just can't pay the tuition, so to speak. Wanted to share that story. So, comments or questions?
I don't want to forget, but I was when I was reading the verses, once again we see the punishment for not doing the right thing is disease, verse 33. That link between if you don't follow commandments, you will get an illness is I know it's throughout our tradition, but once again it's here.
And you don't like it, do you?
Well, I know that's not what causes disease, but
Right, but that's it. I'm glad you brought up that point, because people will often say, you know, what did I do? The Talmud also says, right, bad things are happening to you. Call Robin, would you? Sorry, juggling a lot of plates here, folks. If something bad happens to you, you're supposed to check and see what your behavior has been. Perhaps it's you, and there's entire sections of the Talmud that talk about what punishments for not only for you but for your unborn children are going to happen because of what you're thinking about during sex. I mean, this connection is as ancient as we might think it to be. It's still prevalent and out there, right? People, and sometimes less. It's not about moral transgressions. Not about, tell her we'll call in a second. I'll call in two. It's not about moral qualms. It's about physical, right? Yeah, you got cancer because you smoked a pack a day, or your liver is shot because you drank, whatever it is, right? Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up, right? The point in the Proverbs, of course, is to say that the onus bidei shimayim, the punishment will be in. Yes, did somebody want to say something?
The very last, this man deserves to have the Sabbath profaned on his behalf. Talking about Hillel the elder. I just thought, according to, I think, our tradition, it's always permissible to save a life, right, on Shabbat. And then it made me think of the story about how in the New Testament it says that the Pharisees, they were angry with Jesus because he was healing on the Sabbath day.
Right, and the eating of grain of his students eating the grain because they're hungry, and then connecting that to the soldiers of David, the idea of pikuach nefesh. We'd have to go back to Troy. I'll get to your question in a second. We have to go back to the Talmud to see that's the context. The context is that the sugya about saving a life on that's threatened on Shabbat is in Yoma, and that's where this is coming from. But I don't know if they meant that you could do it not just to save his life, but, well, I guess, yeah, take him off the roof, yeah.
Well, he was in the snow, right?
Yeah, but I guess it doesn't say it's on Shabbat though. But
yeah, it is said that there was a Sabbath Eve in the
winter.
Okay,
great. Okay, thank you. Okay, good. All right. So yes, of course everybody is, but it's kind of like to show. Well, certainly for this guy we should do it. I guess I don't know. And he's actually a nobody, right? He's not a well-known sage, so maybe it's an answer to people that said you could only save important people on Shabbat. Anyway, folks, Troy, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sir. I was just reflecting on Job. I so love that story for various reasons. But don't we sort of learn from that suffering can come, due to no fault of the person? So I guess that would be my question.
Right. So that's I don't know if it's a competing tradition, but it's part of the wide variety of traditions. It's not that Proverbs says that every ailment, every disease is because you did this, right? It's the Proverbs is saying when you do this, you'll get paid back with disease. But that doesn't mean there's other types of disease. So this passage could live side by side with Job. But even if not, though, we expect multiple views, I think, from all of biblical literature, as we see in many cases. Folks, I'm sorry to cut it off, but I get too many things going. I got to get back on the road. Towards the smoke, and everything is all right. My mother's house is not in danger, but hasn't had electricity since yesterday, and there's just too many things happening right now, so I've got to get there to help out Sasha and I. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye. Thank you, Madam.